interesting discussion, folks. Appreciate it. We're going to migrate eastward to Cuba, an anxiously awaited session right now. Very excited to dive into this topic. I have to say, we've never seen anything like Cuba in terms of level of interest and intrigue in Nearshore. It's tantalizing. It's misunderstood. We have been doing an increasing amount of work at Nearshore Americas to help us better understand this market. I've been twice in the last few months. One of the things, though, that's really fundamental before we get ahead of ourselves is to look at what kind of internet telecommunications infrastructure are we dealing with. So we all almost take for granted all of this great, all these great networks across the Americas that, is the undergirder for nearshore outsourcing. We can't do it without that. And what Cuba can and can't do relative to internet is incredibly important. So therefore, we got in touch with Dyn, and we're extremely fortunate to have one of the world's true experts on internet connectivity, who's really going to help us understand that specific part of the Cuba discussion.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. So as Kirk said, I'm Doug Madory from Dyn. So I am a computer scientist. I'm not that familiar with your sector, but I'll happily try to tell you a little about what I know, and maybe that's useful for your operations, especially if you're looking at Cuba. Yeah, so I got associated with this this topic because so what I do, so my title is Director of Internet Analysis, and so what we do at Dyn is we help enterprises understand how internet traffic moves through the internet so that they can optimize performance. And so this is how people visit YouTube or some other, or Twitter or some other type of website, whether they're getting directed to the closest data center, or a lot of it is around DNS based, but we've got, with the acquisition of the company I was with, which was Renesys, we typically worked with telecoms. We've kind of expanded our offerings to things that are greater, more offerings to enterprise that aren't strictly based on DNS, but in general, in a nutshell, I study how the internet traffic moves through the internet in every market in the world, and so as a side effect of that, we kind of notice a lot of developments of the internet that other people don't notice. We notice them before them, and so one of those happened to be the activation of the Alba 1 submarine cable in Cuba a couple years ago. All right, so this was the background here. So. Prior to the activation of Alba 1, Cuba was entirely reliant on satellite. And so for those of you familiar with satellite versus a surface-based telecommunications medium, it is high cost and generally poorer performance. You can't get a round-trip latency across a satellite link, at least a traditional satellite link, in under 480 milliseconds just due to the speed of light to get out to the satellite and back. So typically satellite is... in most markets, if you've got the option to go to some sort of surface medium, you use that, and satellite's a backup. But prior to this cable coming online, they were reliant on satellite. So Venezuela offered to be the ones to fund I think it was an $80 million project to run a submarine cable from Venezuela to Cuba, and there was some delays involved, but eventually it was built by Alcatel-Lucent out of France. However, they built the cable and it was completed in February 2011, and then for about 2 years there was just no word at all about what had happened. There was no change in internet service. There was no comment from the government or the ETECSA, the state telecom, as far as what had occurred. And so then the cottage industry of Cuba observers started to. There was a lot of rumors going around that either the money was stolen or the thing was never really built, or maybe it's broken, or maybe it's on and we don't know it. And I had come across this at some point and weighed in on a blog, and I was like, hey, just to let you know, I can see, and it's satellite, and the cable's not on, but I'll know as soon as it comes on. And that ended up being a headline in the Miami Herald, so I decided this is an interesting topic. So woke up one day on the 14th of January to let me know that there was a new transit provider for ETECSA, which is Telefonica, and so the map on the left is the nautical layout of this the Alba 1 submarine cable. It goes from Venezuela to Cuba, and then there's another spur that goes over to Jamaica, and that spur to Jamaica is a backup link that we did see activated following the activation through Venezuela. This graph on the right is a bunch of dots, colored dots here, but what it's trying to show with the little A with a box in it is the first time when Telefonica showed up as a transit provider for ETECSA. It showed up with a latency that was inconsistent with satellite. It could not possibly be satellite. having said that, it was also too high to be strictly surface-based, and so we made postulated that this was probably a misconfiguration as they turned it on initially. The traffic was coming in the submarine cable and then default routing out the satellite. I wrote that up on a blog. We got a lot of press for that, and then a couple days later, that arrangement got fixed. And it was a couple months later that I met one of the directors of ETECSA at a conference in Medellin, Colombia, and I introduced myself. I was like, "Hey," and he's like, "I know who you are. I read your blog." And then before I asked anything, he was like, "You were right about the asymmetric path. We read it, and we were like, I gotta go fix that." And anyway, it's fine. I mean, it was a new connection, so congratulations for getting the circuit up. I'm not vested in the politics of this. So. This is a layout based off of BGP routing. This is one of the routing data sources that we use for understanding just, it governs actually how internet traffic moves across the internet. It's also one of our primary sources for doing the analysis that we do. If I kind of divide up the pieces here, obviously the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base is kind of irrelevant for our discussions today, but other than that, everything still goes through ETECSA as a state telecom. It's got two options out through the Telefonica on top to go use the Alba 1 submarine cable, and there's Newcom as their satellite. They still use satellite to some extent. It's a single point of failure is one way to look at this diagram, but just to compare to other, somebody else in the region that maybe you wouldn't think would be highly more developed than Cuba. Haiti is what 1/8 the GDP. I don't know if that's right. I just looked it up this week, but it's served by a number of different players that all are backed by foreign investment, and there's local hosting. There's actually a much richer vibrant internet community from our perspective than what is in Cuba, and there are reasons why Cuba is kind of behind where they ought to be, given its size of its economy and the population and location. Perhaps with the announcements starting in December, we'll see some changes. It would be really exciting to see something happen. So far the only part of the agreement with the normalization of relations with the United States was that there would be some broader impact, or broader access to the internet, which has been something that's been constrained by the Cuban government up to now, and it would be exciting to see that change. So we do again. We look at internet analysis specifically for the purpose of performance. And if your company somewhere in the Nearshore region is sensitive to latency because you are connecting across the internet, come talk to me afterwards. That's kind of what we do, is understand, based off of different providers and different locations where they're trying to connect to, what would be the historical trends of performance. What is it right now versus yesterday? That's the kind of stuff that we do. But if we just were to, look at just some recent data for Cuba here. So this is latencies from all of our servers that are running continuously measurements into Cuba, into ETECSA, from 180 cities around the world, all thrown on a single plot. And I'm just zeroing in on Telefonica, which is their primary service provider coming through, serving Cuba across the Alba 1 cable. You can see there's a pattern here, and I've seen this for a while now, and it's worth noting that you have these diurnal patterns as the distribution of latencies kind of spike during the weekdays. And so what this is consistent with is some human activity driving congestion, and so you can make the conclusion that there are some congested links. That's conclusion one. Conclusion two is it's not happening on the weekends, so that could probably be explained by the fact that there isn't a lot of internet use at home, and that who's driving these spikes and latencies are people at work on the internet, and that's there isn't people don't go home at night and use their. If you looked at Comcast in some markets in the United States, you'd see a pattern like this, but it would happen in the evenings as people go home and they start downloading some movie or something, and then it starts putting stress on the network. Here we're seeing work hours in Cuba are what's stressed. So it would be great to see. New players come into this market, as have happened in other countries that have opened up, and there's a lot of examples of where that's been very successful, and I hope to see something like that replicated in Cuba.
So appreciate the thoughts. Starting with the issue of what Cuba, the kind of path or model that Cuba might follow. You mentioned Burma. I love to call it Burma rather than Myanmar. So
Okay. Yeah,
talk about that.
I think of all the markets, so my scope is kind of the whole world, so I have to kind of follow internet and telecom in just about every country. And if you've got a favorite, come find me afterwards. I can tell you some things about it. But I think of all the interesting places, Myanmar is going through something, Burma, that is really remarkable, and I feel like it could be replicated in Cuba. It's a model that at least somebody could learn from who's making policy decisions in Cuba. And so what happened there was, a few years ago, they opened up to the world.
State-run monopoly.
Yeah, state-run monopoly. I mean, the country just in general and its economy opened up to the world. People relaxed sanctions, and they're kind of getting integrated into the global economy, certainly the Asian economy. And it's in the telecom sector, the area that I know well. They had a lot of good advice from consultants that came in from the World Bank, and how to most efficiently run opening up a market that's essentially a green field, and there's nobody there. And what's the best way to do it so that all parties benefit? The government benefits, the people benefit, and then the outside company is attracted to come in and thinks they're going to be able to make some money. And so in that case, I think a lot of consultants who work in this space now look at Myanmar or Burma as a great model of just how it worked well. Because right now since last summer, we're seeing. They're having this internet explosion of just millions and millions of people getting online for the first time. It's a country of about 60 million people. I think the GDP is actually about the same as Cuba.
Did they start at the same point relative to internet penetration?
No, they probably were behind. A couple of cities had some connectivity, and then anybody who's out into the countryside, there's zero. They had an open process for people to come in and bid for licensees, and so Telenor out of Norway was one of the winners. They paid the government $500 million to get a 15-year license, I think some period of time of exclusivity, but they also had to agree to build out their own infrastructure, and they're committing $1 billion that they're going to spend in Myanmar to build out infrastructure. Myanmar, their role is to just manage this correctly, and in the meantime they can recoup these licensing fees.
So an opportunity for Cuba.
Everybody kind of wins, and so I think I look at Cuba, the exact same thing I think in its own version could occur there. There would be companies from around the world that would line up to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for licenses, similar vein to Myanmar, and they could. The government could require them to build out the infrastructure. It wouldn't have to be just ETECSA building it, because I think that's what was a lesson learned over the years in other places where there was rollouts. I think everybody knows now you roll out, if you want a quick, rapid rollout, you're going to roll out mobile. That's the easiest to put up towers and some level of fixed line infrastructure. Anyway, so that's what was done in Myanmar. It could be done in Cuba, but typically the state telecom is not usually the outfit that's equipped to do that.
It's very difficult at this stage. Now, we've got a researcher in Havana developing a very comprehensive report on IT, telecom, the ITC situation in Havana. We'll release that in June. I think it's safe to assume, I believe, that it'll remain a monopoly. I believe, at least from what we're hearing. But help me understand, just from a kind of a layman's perspective, if I'm in Havana, what kind of speeds am I going to be getting on the internet?
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you're trying to connect to, so it's a hard thing to answer precisely. But I think even for a Caribbean location, you're going to be below average.
Well, yeah, and specifically, so one of the things we're hearing, again, I know that it's not something you necessarily know directly, but we've heard Huawei, which is one of the major Chinese telecommunications builders selling gear, is in some conversations. Any care to comment on that?
Well, that's right. There was a story that was put out in Spanish language news about an anonymous source out of Texas saying that they were in negotiations with Huawei to do the fielding of infrastructure in Cuba. And I had spoken to a reporter I know who covers the beat, and he tried to look into it and did get some qualified confirmation from Huawei that they were in some sort of discussions, but it was too early to characterize it. I guess considering the history and the politics, that doesn't seem like an unreasonable path forward. it probably wouldn't be the optimal one, but if they were to just sign on with a single Chinese vendor, maybe they are concerned about surveillance or concerned about.
Well, and
you know,
by the way, the
things.
vendor would come with manpower, right? It'd be consultants and.
That's typically how it goes.
Yeah.
I would expect that to be the case. And so then you would have perhaps you would have Huawei doing the fielding of infrastructure equipment. So that would be some improvement over where they're at now. I think it's hard to replicate the value of firms competing for like we've got in Myanmar. Where somebody had to lay out hundreds of millions of dollars, and now they're on the hook to. They bought this license, and now they got to recoup it. And the incentive is entirely now directed back at them to do a good job and build this thing out. So if they're just going to contract somebody to come and do something.
But do you think that we may see a Claro or a Digicel or those kinds of Telefonica in Cuba at some point?
I bet those guys are trying to.
I'm sure they're trying.
Work the channels. That would make sense. Although like I mentioned for Haiti, after the earthquake, Viettel in Vietnam bought the national operator there. All these companies have got people roaming the earth, looking for opportunities, and I think something like Cuba doesn't come along.
No, exactly.
And so,
but that's what's really interesting and intriguing to me. I would imagine it's incredibly important that they're getting good advice. So where does a country like that typically go, and where can they make the mistakes in that? Because that's going to critically be the answer. Do they understand about these auctions? Do they understand about the ability to leapfrog?
There is a class of people out there that are telecom consultants that do this kind of work. I don't know all the flavors they come in, but the expertise is for sure out there, and I think like I make the point with Myanmar, and there's probably a couple other countries you can make the example with that. It's worth it to get the good advice, and you can still be in control of the process, and you can do it your way if there's some particular flavor you want to.
Now, another thing is, based on the submarine cable stuff you do know, to what degree are they constrained by that link? And what opportunity exists for them? Because, I mean, you're starting at a point where they could probably do some really cool technologies out of the gate, right? So, 4G and beyond, and MPLS and all that stuff.
So maybe a word or two about the submarine cable. Submarine cables don't happen overnight, so they are years and years in the making. So since there isn't one kind of really in motion right now, this is going to be it for at least 4 or 5 years. These things are they take a long time. Having said that, in the submarine cable community, which having broken a few stories in the submarine cable space, now I'm a speaker at those conferences too. So I've got to know how they operate a little bit. But one issue in that that's interesting, it's a benefit here, it's a stress on that community, is that the advancement of the technology has actually been moving forward quite a bit, so much so that there are upgrades available now to some of the existing submarine cables. They can go 2 orders of magnitude up in capacity, huge steps up in capacity. If the cable's been fielded in the last 10 or even 15 years, they just swap out the equipment on the ends, and they are on another level of capacity. So I do get this question a lot of is that cable enough or not? And I'm going to guess I'm guessing they're not taxing that cable because it was built only in the last 4 years, 4 years ago. If they were, that's a solvable problem, and you could boost that capacity.
So with Francisco last night, I think he wouldn't mind me sharing this, hopefully. He's obviously a good source, working for the U.S. government. And he's told me, at least he heard from somebody that, and I don't know, you would probably know the answer, but AT&T would have had a connection to Cuba way back, 50 years plus, right? So there's rumor that there already is a cable now. I don't know, whatever you would build in the 40s.
In the past, there was a cable. I think it was a copper cable. It wasn't fiber optic. Fiber optic submarine cables only started in like the 1980s. There was an old one, and it was.
But does that have any practical value at this point?
No, that is not an operation presently, and I don't think it has been for 20 or something years. I mean, there was some old cable that got destroyed in a hurricane or something. There's some event, but it's not not relevant to today's Cuban internet.
Should they make the right moves? Should they get broadband to the masses? Is this sort of a hockey stick up in terms of penetration? So what do you recall? I think it's less than 10% of Cubans.
estimated internet penetration.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a remarkably low number. I don't know.
Which is, do you know any market in the world where you have an incredibly high literacy, 99.5%, yet horrific internet?
Yeah, it's a really unique. There's nothing else like it. I think if you look at things that are, so there's not a lot of like another thing that we look at are where's content hosted. So in Cuba, there's not actually much hosted locally. Not that surprising because it's not a very well developed internet. But the few things that are there are their academic network hosts a lot of web pages about the different, mostly medical conferences that they do and medical studies, and it's typically healthcare, university related stuff. There are Cuba does have ETECSA does have a limited hosting. They have a hosting capability. They do host websites for some content, but there's no content delivery networks, which are kind of like Akamai or Edgecast, those kind of things. Those don't operate there. Google does not have a presence there, although they've been making a lot of trips there, and I've been in touch with the group that's gone, and I wouldn't be surprised to see if that were to.
Oh, really?
I don't know. I've got something looking each day.
Okay.
To see if Google's caching thing does just one day just show up in Cuba. But as far as like the average that would benefit the average internet user in Cuba, where the content, if it's cached in some sort of a cache server, then you don't need to cross the submarine cable and go out to Mountain View, California to reach Google content. It would be resident. Some of it, at least, would be cached within the telecom zone network. That's a big boost in performance for the work that probably a lot of these outfits here do. That probably doesn't help that much, other than maybe if you wanted to watch a YouTube video or something, it may be cached.
So, by the way, you're not only a telecom expert, but you're an IT guy, right? Didn't you? A lot of folks here are very much tied to the software development industry. We've met quite a few people in Havana who actually are IT professionals, some of them doing software development services for overseas clients. So it actually is happening now.
Great.
How capable is the country today to do that kind of thing at a broader scale?
I guess it would pose a challenge, depending on how sensitive the work is to kind of latency based, or like if it's very offline, like an email based kind of thing, you can conduct your work that way. Then perhaps maybe less so that you would be sensitive to that. But anything that would be more sensitive to VPNs or other types of connections out to connect to, I think it could pose a challenge, and I don't know, depending on how bad it was, it could be, it may be something that would need to be seriously vetted before you were able to actually operate there.
Do you know, I don't believe Skype is working into Cuba. Do you know for a fact whether that's the case? Whether it's purposely?
I don't know.
Right,
Okay.
So it's because of the latency probably.
It could be. There's financial issues.
Yeah, well, let's open it up, by the way.
Yeah, my name is Vito Echeverria. I'm a journalist with a publication called Cuba Standard, based in Miami. We used to be known as Cuba News. And what I was going to say is, ETECSA has its own economic reasons why it has no interest in bringing Skype to Cuba, because it's going to cut into their revenues.
Sure. Okay.
I saw the same thing in Belize. So they spent a lot of money apparently to disrupt the network in a way that wouldn't allow Skype to work.
That's common around the world. I know I'm in the Middle East a fair amount, and they'll, like in the UAE, it's hard to get Skype to work because they're trying to protect their revenue from long distance calls, and so that's a common fight and happening everywhere. And so I guess what ends up happening is in just about any market around the world, what you can kind of see the maturity of the market is driven by how astute and powerful the regulator is, the telecom regulator is there, and if they're able to foment competition, and it'll drive down prices, improve. So actually, Mexico is another important place to look at for telecom regulation. That's a generic problem, and so every country lands somewhere on that spectrum. But even just from a data scientist, looking at this stuff, you can easily pick out the differences between a very closed market and a very open market. Just the number of players, the number of international connections out, and then you can probably make judgments on, well, there's probably better pricing, and there's probably better less restrictions on things like Skype and other things, because if the regulator is somewhat strong and assertive, then they typically try to put forward those policies. So We'll see if that happens in Cuba.
I was just curious, those results you showed before, were those on a variety of different endpoints, both going in and out? Or is that mainly just one particular endpoint in Cuba you were testing?
It is many. I don't know the number of how many. So what we'll do is, not to get too technical here, but look at all the routed prefixes, all the routed networks out of Cuba, and find multiple hosts with each one that'll respond to an ICP message. That's done algorithmically and refreshed, periodically. So at any time we've got hosts that we can measure to in any ISP in the world, and we have that data going back 6 years and routing data going back 15 years. Starting from the outside going in, and you can kind of have there's typically asymmetries with the paths, so you can have something slightly different coming out, but I think that's still reliable data.
Doug, as an American seeing all this really just fascination with Cuba, what do you make of it more as an American, and do you think, do you sort of see if they can get their internet act together, there'll be a whole lot of opportunity for our country?
Well, I think if they can get the act together, I think there's a lot of opportunity for them, and we, the United States kind of stands in a good position to take advantage of it with all the existing infrastructure of just like the companies and operations that have been discussed today, to be ready to quickly move in and take advantage of a new open market nearby. The United States stands to benefit, and so do the people of Cuba.
So I know submarines cables take years and years to build. If, say, Huawei does come in, and how long reasonably say that they were hired to build out a network?
That's hard for me to estimate. I know that if we're looking at Myanmar, I mean, those guys, that was something on the order of a year where they were getting initial presence of their network established in the major cities. So I don't know. I think the Cuban terrain is probably easier to navigate than the jungles of Southeast Asia. So maybe it could go faster in cooperation with the state telecom, as opposed to having to do it on their own. Maybe there could be some speed up there, but what they need is last mile infrastructure in some way or form, and that can be fairly labor intensive. You got to wire, they need to replace the cabling to buildings and upgrade this to modern stuff.
What about broadband wireless? We used
wireless.
to hear a lot about WiMAX over the years and all that.
Yeah, WiMAX is kind of on the way out. It's going to replace the 4G. They use the same frequency, so you kind of usually people get rid of the WiMAX and cannibalize it into 4G. But there are lots of examples of countries where, especially in Africa, is kind of a cliche in the telecom market of a place where mobile operators come in quick, put up towers. They just need to run lines to the towers, and after that, there are huge pockets of area with service, which actually fairly high-speed service that can be put up pretty quickly. So it could be inside of a year. If they were to start working on it today, maybe they already have, and we just don't know about it because we don't.
Some of the hotels do have high-speed internet, and you can get Wi-Fi service, just if you sit in certain spots in certain hotels. Mm-hmm. They do have internet cafes, but the service is very, very slow. But you do have high speed in some of the Melia.
But it still has to. You have two options to get out: either the submarine cable or a satellite link. There's not a third medium to get out off the island.
It doesn't. That latency looks pretty bad, given the low penetration. Do you think that's being intentionally slowed down? And it doesn't look materially better than your satellite uplink. Is that a viable backup channel for the short term?
Well, and the last graph was an aggregate of latencies from all over the world. So latencies from Mongolia are in there, and so they're going to be really high. And so that's I wouldn't read too much. I mean, you can look at the floor of that distribution, and I think that tells me that this is based off something technical. So I've gotten that question of, is it like Great Wall of a Great Firewall of China or something? Slowing down, and I kind of don't believe that that's the case. So that's just my interpretation of the data, partly due to the fact that if you were to take a very long time scale, there seems to be an impenetrable floor that the data can never, the latencies can never go below something, and with China you'll see other diurnal patterns where they're slowing down. That's China's a whole. There's a lot of explanation there for China. I don't want to get into, but. The fact that it seems to be a hard floor to me tells me that there's a technical reason, and I think that's just comment on the state of the infrastructure there.
So
All
I
right.
appreciate it. Doug
Great.
Madory.
All right, thanks a lot.